So welcome to the Uptake of Digital Research Infrastructure Interest Group. Today we're really looking at the understanding use cases and needs for different types of infrastructures and users. Next slide. Okay, so for the agenda today, we'll do a bit of some welcomes and introductions and a brief background to the group. And we will also talk through the summary of the outcomes from RDA Plenary 2022, as well as the outcomes from eResearch Australasia, where we ran a BOF of a similar nature in October this year. We will then have two fabulous presentations, one from Letitia Bracco from the French Open Science Monitor and Elena Grinizzi around exploring the policy impact of digital research infrastructures. And then we're going to step into a bit more of a working session, and we will try to, I guess, have a discussion around what uptake means for different users and what are the different kinds of categories of research, digital research infrastructure. And what do we want to find out about key use cases? Next slide. Okay, so in the room today, you have me. I'm Liv Shanahan. I work at the Australian Research Data Commons with my two colleagues, Stephanie Kethers, who's in the front row, and Ming-Fang Wu, who is also here. Who's not here is Kylie Black, who is back home in Perth in Australia, but she's also part of the group as a co-chair. Just a bit of housekeeping. We do have our collaborative notes document. You can go to it at that link there if you can see it. I can say it out loud if you need me to. And the document will also have links to our slides. So we really hope that you get involved, write some notes, any comments, we welcome them. And also in the latter half of the session, we're going to use Menti. So if you have a phone, that'd be great because we will be relying on your answers. Next slide. Okay, so the scope of our group. So research infrastructure uptake, in particular, how to define and capture and measure and evaluate the uptake is, I guess, of interest to many stakeholders, including researchers, funders, policy advocates, as well as the operators and builders of digital research infrastructure. So I guess the question is, well, why? And I like to think of the 4 A's of impact. So you've got accountability, which is really around providing evidence of effectiveness of your digital research infrastructure. Allocation, which is around ensuring that your resources are being used effectively. Analysis, which is really around understanding the success or failure and lessons learned. And advocacy, which if you are reliant on funding, then you need to be able to show, demonstrate the value and the benefits. Next slide. Okay, so a little bit of a background to this group. We had a BOF session at the Research Data Alliance Plenary 21, which showed interest in establishing an RDA group, which was originally called Capturing and Understanding the Uptake of Digital Research Infrastructure. And then we, at Plenary 22, we started to work on our charter and what that might look like and what would be included. The charter is now called the Statement of Work, which is now actually available on the RDA website and is available for review. So we would love your comments on that and perspectives. The Statement of Work, the deadline to provide comments is the 21st of November, which is Thursday next week. Okay, so next slide. The outcomes from the Plenary 2022 session, we have linked to the collaborative notes from there, and they are also linked in our collaborative notes from today. So feel free to go and have a look at that. We had over 20 people joining in the session, and the group really worked on the major components of our charter, particularly looking at what our potential use cases could be, the objectives, timelines, and the types of communities we should really engage. There was a lot of chat around what do we want to broaden the word or the meaning of uptake to include both quantitative and qualitative aspects and possibly consider long-term outcomes leading to impact. So broadening it, not just at that initial stage of uptake and adoption. So as part of Plenary 2022, the suggested first outputs were to conduct a literature review or an environmental scan and confirm the use cases and needs through a survey. So we know that lots of people are doing similar work, so we don't want to reinvent the wheel, but we want to know who's doing what and how we can refine that. And the agreed steps after that session were really around clarifying the scope of the group, developing a group statement of work, which we now have, and developing a survey based on the use cases, which we will talk a little bit more about today. Next slide. Okay, and at eResearch Australasia this year in October, we also ran a session to test some of these, I guess, ideas. We had 45 people, so it was a big group of people who came, and we were just asking two key questions. And that was, what indicators does your organization use to measure and understand the uptake of DRI? And I don't think this will surprise you. Most people were using quantitative analytics like web analytics, number of users and type of users, downloads, publications, citations, acknowledgements. And there was some qualitative data like user surveys, training, and event attendance numbers. So what have we learnt? I think for most people, we really need to use a mix of methods to really weave a narrative around that uptake. And there was also a discussion around using other disciplines as exemplars around communications and marketing uptake. Next slide. Okay, so we are ready for our first video from Letitia, and we'll just get that up now. So Letitia is from the French Open Science Monitor.
Hello, my name is Laetitia Braco. I am the head of the Research Data Support. Open Science Monitor, which was really basic at the time. In my university, we were open science enthusiasts since many years, and we seized this opportunity to monitor also the progress of open science among our institution. We were then, in 2020, the first institution in France to reuse the code of the ministry and, with some updations, to have a local monitor. Our own code was also open source, and really quickly, many other institutions, universities, and research organizations followed us. In 2021, the National Monitor was radically enhanced with lots of new indicators and a development dedicated to health. The same year, the second National Open Science Plan was published, with the ambitious goal to have 100% of open access to scientific publications in 2030. Finally, 2021 was also the beginning of the research data and software extension of the national monitor. The local monitors beginning to grow by the day, we created a users club with the ministry, with today nearly 250 members. In 2023, the first indicators on research data and software were released. So what were the requirements of the French National Open Science Monitor? We wanted to be consistent with our policy. That's why, of course, we couldn't use proprietary databases, such as the Web of Science or Scopus. The metadata had to be open so that everyone, and especially public institutions, could reuse the results of the monitor. The code had to be open source. Updates had to be regular to monitor open science through time. And of course, to get the attention of stakeholders, indicators had to be easy and visual. Our latest release last year showed that at the national level, 65% of our publications are in open access, which is a fair share, but that can, of course, be improved. But as you can see so far, we have only addressed the question of open access to publications, whether they are articles, book chapters, theses, or clinical trials. How did we move from an open access monitor to an open science monitor? In 2021, the ministry asked the Université de Lorraine, as the leader of the local monitors community, to lead the project of the National Open Science Monitor on datasets and software. We were soon joined by INRIA, the main French public research organizations on computer science. We obtained the funding from the European Recovery Plan. We then had to address lots of challenges. Firstly, technical ones. There is no global database for research data and software. There are too many identifiers for research data. Datasite DOIs, of course, but also accession numbers, entry numbers, and at the same time, too few identifiers for research data, because a lot of data repositories still don't attribute persistent identifiers, as well as for software. Software-related IDs are still not very common, for instance. This is for technical challenges. Now for factual challenges. There is still very low awareness from researchers on the value of these research products. As a result, many still don't see the interest of publishing their research data or software on public repositories. In order to face these challenges, we adopted a dual method. The first 2 years of the project were dedicated to what we call the publication approach. Having gathered the French corpus of publications metadata, we first had to download as many full texts as possible. We then applied machine learning techniques on the full texts to detect and characterize mentions to datasets and software. And finally, we were able to compute indicators. The second part of the project on which we are currently working is called the repository approach. And this side of the project, we focus on datasets deposited in repositories and not necessarily linked to publications. So how do we detect datasets and software mentions? We developed an innovative approach based upon the machine learning tools developed by Patrice Lopez from Science Miner. The first tool is GrosBid, which is transforming full texts into structured files. We then applied SoftCite to detect software mentions and Datastat to detect datasets mentions. The characterization of mentions is crucial. Indeed, we want to know if data or software was really used, for instance, and not just mentioned. We therefore choose a 3-level characterization. Firstly, what was the mentioned dataset or software? Was it really used in the research work? Secondly, if it was mentioned, was it produced or created by the authors or reused from a previous work? And thirdly, if the dataset or software was created by the authors, is it shared? And by sharing, we mean actual sharing. Availability upon reasonable request is simply not enough. What are our first results? Since 2013, we can see that more and more publications are mentioning the use of datasets or software. Amongst the publications whose authors mention the use of data, we can see that a fair share produces their own data. The third indicator is the most important and considers publications for which the production of data is mentioned. Indeed, this one shows how many authors share the data they are actually producing and mentioning. In 2022, we reached the score of 22%. There is still a long way to go, and for software, the rate is similar with 29% of shared code. Since the first local version of the monitor, published by my university in 2020, nearly 200 universities, research organizations, and research units have started their own open science monitor. Indeed, a common methodology has been set up for everyone, allowing to compare the results. The indicators are thus harmonized at the national scale. So there is a very strong dynamics with an ever-growing community. So what are our perspectives for the future? The numerous exchanges we had with other countries and institutions led us to propose the creation of an international community. This is the starting point of the Open Science Monitoring Initiative, OSMI.
Unfortunately, Letitia isn't here, so we can't ask any questions, but we do have her contact details. And if you would like to reach out to her, we would be happy to do that. We've now got a presentation by Alina Grinice from EFIS, who is part of the Horizon 2020 project. And she's done a lot of work on impact pathways, particularly around research infrastructures. And she's going to be talking about the European Social Survey.
My name is Elina Griniec, and I'm the principal researcher at the European Future Innovation Systems Centre. And this afternoon, I would like to focus my talk on the topic of the uptake of digital research infrastructure data in policy making. So a couple of words about EFIS Centre and our expertise. So EFIS Centre is a Brussels-based policy research lab with more than a decade-long experience for assistance to research infrastructures in their strategy development and implementation of monitoring and impact evaluation frameworks. We've led a couple of key knowledge creation projects. One of them, most notable of them, was Horizon 2020 project RDA Path, which was a 2.5 years long project dedicated specifically to the topic of socioeconomic impact of research infrastructures and how do we measure this, the investment into research infrastructures, and how do we see the causal chains from this investment materializing in socioeconomic benefits. But we also do support projects for individual research infrastructure, so more technical assistance. And we are highly engaged in global networks on this topic of socioeconomic impact, including European Commission, ESFRI, and OECD working groups, as well as conferences for Global Research Council and ICRI. And we boast ourselves with the extended knowledge of participatory evaluation techniques and novel impact assessment methods. So my talk today will focus on exploring policy impacts of research infrastructures, and I would like to depict this topic with the case of the European Social Survey. So we run a small study for the European Social Survey on their policy impacts. And European Social Survey is a digital research infrastructure. Essentially, it is an international comparative survey of social and political values and attitudes, and it was launched in 2002, so quite a while already operational. And the focus of the study was to understand the visibility, accessibility, and reachability of ESS data at national and international policy levels. An objective was to analyze the uptake and usage patterns of ESS data for policy purposes and outline areas, means, and channels how this usage could be improved. So sort of backward-looking and forward-looking objectives. And the method applied for the study was desk research. We did data analysis in Overton database, which is the largest database of policy documents. And we did a range of interviews with national, international policy-making bodies. For those of you who probably don't know the Overton database, couple of words about it. So Overton is the world's largest searchable index of policy documents. And when I'm talking policy documents, I mean policy studies and guidelines and think tank publications and working papers. At the moment, it comprises more than 13 million different documents across the globe in all kinds of languages, in all possible languages. And why I like the database, because it allows to track policy mentions of research infrastructures and the research resulting from research infrastructures on an ongoing basis. So it's being updated on a routinely basis. And it allows to see what kind of organizations are using the data that mention research infrastructures and research that results from the data of research infrastructures. And it enables engagement with these organizations. It basically provides means to spot both the uptake and the lack of uptake of RI data in policy sphere. And as a database, it not only allows various filtering and various characteristics of these policy documents, but it does include direct links to the documents, meaning if you are interested in a very specific set of documents, you can also search for the direct references. So a couple of examples of what kind of information we were able to draw out from this database for the purposes of the ESS. So one of the angles of the data we saw immediately that references to ESS data were very prevalent. So they were found in more than 3,000 policy documents stemming from 380 sources. And you could see also what kind of organizations are citing or writing reports based on this data. Either these are government organizations, think tanks, or international government organizations. One could also explore more in detail whether those are governmental agencies, university-affiliated think tanks, or international development banks. So all kinds of criteria of the typology of the organizations using the data. But it also enables to see the entire list of the specific organizations, so see the names of the organizations. We were also able to extract, because the Overton database includes inbuilt dashboards of various angles of the data, we could also extract the geographical distribution of sources citing ESS with various ways to explore it. And using the Excel file from this database, we could construct a wider range of other graphics. For instance, the most frequent policy topics of documents citing ESS data. So all kinds of possibilities to use this database with more quantification element in them. But we obviously used the data from desk research and interviews, and using all this quantitative and qualitative data together, we were able to construct 5 main impact pathways of the mechanisms how ESS data is really contributing to policy making within the policy making circle. So a couple of examples of the impact statements we were able to put forward to the research infrastructure. So the first impact pathway on contributing to agenda setting, we could say that the relevance of ESS data to shaping policy debates appears really to be high, and we could even single out the thematic areas where this relevance is high. Impact pathway on informing policy design. We also saw that ESS data is frequently included in studies as evidence, yet its full contribution to policy formulation may not always be visible. I think this is a very, very frequent case for digital research infrastructures, that systematic acknowledgement practices need to be improved, but it's definitely an avenue to further exploration for further improvements. Another pathway or a statement we could include for the infrastructure, we saw that the integration of ESS data in tools that support policy making is really a major opportunity to increase the policy impact in a strategic and systematic way. So this kind of work is for them to do further, for them to in order to increase the policy impact in the future. So another pathway that we formulated that might have more sense while reading the report. But what I would like to leave you with, I think it's a summary of 3 challenges and 3 opportunities that spring to my mind when thinking about the scoping and measuring of the uptake of research infrastructures and their data and tools. One of the things is that each research infrastructure is a distinct ecosystem that entails interactions with very different stakeholders. So there is no one-size-fits-all approach to measuring uptake and impact. But what we do find is that if there is a common agreement or common learning among various research infrastructure types, that there is a lot of learning can be really transferred from all these individual experiences with impact assessment and measuring uptake. Another thing is the old issue about availability of data. And I believe availability of data will always remain a challenge for measuring uptake and impact of research infrastructures. But what I think is more important to put focus is the relevance of the available data, because from our experience, what we learn is that research infrastructures are quite well versed to measure and to scope and to monitor key performance indicators, while more important measurements such as outcome indicators, not even talking about the impact indicators, are frequently missing. So the relevance part of the available data needs significant improvements. And then the third thing, any measurement of uptake and impact of research infrastructures really requires complex analysis, and which includes need for appropriate skill sets. In many cases, research infrastructures don't hold those skill sets in-house on demand. So what I think is important is to consider what is feasible to do with the means you have in-house for the requirements that you are supposed to respond to, and always apply the principle of proportionality, meaning whether the invested effort in gathering the new data, in applying certain method, in analyzing, basically putting effort into analysis, will match the expected value from the analysis. And if it does not, the analysis should remain simpler, more streamlined, and basically to the abilities of the staff abilities and time of the staff members. And on opportunities, also 3 points. So the first thing is that I do believe that systematic stakeholder mapping may indeed provide the needed clarity on potential for uptake and future impact of research infrastructures. It really means that understanding who your main stakeholders are and who your main user groups are and how they interact with the data or the tools the research infrastructure provides is essential, and that's a qualitative understanding. Without such a mapping, I think we cannot talk about also comprehensive approach to measuring the uptake. A second thing, and that's also my personal belief, is that numbers matter, but they do matter in context. And I think the case studies and well-constructed database narratives can be a very, very powerful tool in communicating both the numbers and also the context of these numbers. Hence, very powerful impact statements can be drawn from also very well done case studies. And the last thing, I do believe that there is an untapped potential for the use of external databases in impact work. And as I already showed with the case of Overton database, there is more to dig in what's available at the moment, but research infrastructures probably need guidance on how to extract the most useful proxy data on the RI uptake and impact, and such kind of preparation of such kind of guidance might be really, really very helpful. So this is a very short couple of key points, but I'm very, very happy to interact with you more if you want to learn more about Epicenter, about ESS study, or about Overton example, or any other query you might have. I leave you my contacts. I'll be very happy to exchange with you either via email or in a call. Thank you very much and have a good discussions. Bye.
That was a long one, but a goodie, I think. I really thank both of our speakers today for providing their videos to this discussion, and I hope that that may fuel some thoughts for later on today. Have we had this slide? Have we had this slide? No. Okay, so an overview. We're just going to go quickly through our statement of work for our interest group. And have a little look at the outcomes and the outputs we're looking at achieving in the short to medium term. Really, our interest group initial plan is around defining digital research infrastructure and uptake. All good? Yes. Okay. So yeah, the initial work plan. Do we have to? Hello?
Yes, it works now. Thank you.
Hello? Okay.
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yes, so defining what digital research infrastructure is and types of digital research infrastructure and what uptake means, and confirming use cases and the questions for each use case, as well as defining and developing the outputs of the group. Today, we're going to look at the first two. Next slide. So I was originally going to talk about our outputs first and then move to outcomes, but I think it's really important to start at outcomes and really think about, well, what's the ultimate value that this interest group can provide to the RDA stakeholders here and our stakeholders elsewhere. So we wanted to look at the possible outcomes, and we came we came to the conclusion of these four, but we really want to understand whether we've missed some of these outcomes we want to achieve. And if you have any suggestions, can you put in the collaborative notes? So the first one was developing, having an agreed model for understanding DRI uptake and use, higher quality evaluations due to an improved set of use and uptake metrics and measures, a common understanding of DRI uptake and how it might be demonstrated, as well as understanding a key step in the impact pathway between DRI outputs, outcomes, and impact. Okay, so these are our what we want to see as a result of the interest group in the next 18 months. And how are we going to get there? Is our next slide. Would be through a number of outputs. So the first thing that was suggested to do as part of the group was to do an environmental scan, which would comprise of two elements. The first one would be a survey of the different user groups to understand and elicit their use case and needs, and also to undertake a literature review, an environmental scan of what's been happening elsewhere. The second output would be developing a typology of categories of digital research infrastructure. And the third one would be around cataloging a catalog of qualitative and quantitative measures of uptake as relevant for different types of stakeholders, whether they be researchers, government, funders, operators, or policy advisors, or anyone else. And the fourth one would be to develop recommendations for each of those stakeholders on what measures of uptake may be most relevant and how to capture and track them. Next slide. We're going to move to our discussion now, which will be led by my colleague, Stephanie.
Thanks, Liv. But before we do that, are there any questions or comments at this point?
Eventually, yes, the other day we discussed possible collaboration, liaison and collaboration between the evaluation of research interest group and this group. So it's just to say that it would be good to stay in touch and to see how things are can be built up.
Thanks, Françoise. Hi, Francois. Rosie is here. Just one question or not a question perhaps, Liv, but a comment. When we're looking at the required outputs, there's very much a focus on the current status. And one of the things I think it's important to acknowledge is we're doing this work because we're not quite where we want to be. And so having an output, and I think it's from your fourth dot point, which is around providing recommendations. I think that this community is incredibly well positioned to be very strong in guidance around recommendations, for instance, driving the national PIDs agenda and how that can help us support this particular program of work. Thanks, Rosie. And I think, sorry, just a sec. I think one of the main things we want to do is connect with more groups within RDA and also outside. So, for example, the PIDs groups, that certainly, we certainly want to connect with them. But if there are other groups and other aspects that you think some other groups represent, please also let us know and put them in the collaborative notes. That'd be great.
Hi, I'm CJ, and directly to this point, I'm co-chair for the Global Open Research Commons Interest Group and Working Group. And one piece of the model that doesn't get talked about a lot is that we have a full set of like 100 different key performance indicators and metrics for commons, of which research infrastructures are a part of and sometimes are. So there's like a high level of overlap between this group and that part of the GORC model, but I am so extremely happy for that piece of the work to move to this group and Francois is on the Zoom call, so I can say this, so many people were very not happy to look at KPIs and metrics. So yeah, just in addition to a point of your environmental scan and literature review, we do have a literature environmental scan that's coded by which things actually talked about key performance indicators and metrics. And I'm very happy to share that. It's open, as well as the things that are already in the GORC model that might be a good place to start. So just highlighting that, it'd be good to have our two groups work together on that part too.
That would be wonderful. And again, if you can put anything into the notes, that'd be great. But we're also happy to, at some point, organize a call or something like that, if that would be good. Right. Let's move on to the Menti. Yep, that one.
Okay, let's leave that on for a second. And the people on Zoom, don't they see the RDA recording thing? So it's again, it's not quite right. Sorry, the juggling around with sharing different tabs is a bit more complicated. Yeah. On Zoom, you should be able to see the QR code now as well.
We see it.
Good. Okay. All right. It's interesting. Yeah. Okay. Have people already put stuff in, or is this leftovers from last time? That's new? Okay. Because I thought I'd actually cleared everything out. Okay. So question is, what do you see as uptake of digital research infrastructure? Because when we started out this group, there was a bit of a discussion about what do we actually mean by uptake, and everyone had a bit of an idea about what that could be, but we didn't really, we had very different angles on the word uptake. So the question we have there is, what do you see as uptake? And let's see what we have. Okay,
I have a comment. I
Yes,
have a comment
Françoise?
on that, if I may. You know, there are several kinds, as you already recognize, of DRAs, and I think the uptake depends on the type in some cases.
And the type of DRI?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
So
right.
it's a bit difficult to answer this question in absolute terms.
Okay.
Except
and that,
research coming out of a DRA, okay. But the rest of it, if you go into the details, it's more difficult.
okay, so that sounds like these, I think it was the second output we were thinking about as a typology of digital research infrastructures would be helpful there. So we've got, okay, so we've got more research institutes using DRIs, more researchers at those institutes using the DRIs. That makes sense. More DRIs being interoperable with each other. Sorry. Okay, yeah. I don't think you can scroll down on there. No, can you back? Forward. Okay, and scroll down. Okay, good, thanks. So let's have a look. Okay, so depends on the DRI type. I guess that was François. Number of accesses, again, more researchers using the services. Okay. Indicator that let us know the product services being used meaningfully. I don't know if the person who put that in would like to elaborate on that, because that was one of the things we actually thought about in the beginning. What does usage actually mean, and is it worth having a digital research infrastructure with 5 million users if they all just play games on it versus a digital infrastructure with 20 users that cure cancer? You know, presumably the numbers there really don't make, you know, don't make or break it. So that's what Elina said in her talk as well. Numbers need to be in context. But I don't know if the person wanted to elaborate on that. Okay. So there's one on funding. So local, regional, national, and pan-national government bodies putting funding towards and placing importance on DRIs. That's a very important point. And very often things like usage numbers and stuff can be used to advocate for that. But again, I think there's also the aspect of meaningfulness. Sorry, am I in the way? in addition to that, not just local, regional and national government bodies, but you would also potentially include other co-investment as a indicator.
Thanks, Stephanie. You weren't in the way. My look of consternation is because whilst I agree absolutely that funding indicates how well infrastructures are perceived and supported, I wouldn't see it as uptake. And then when we come back to your comment about whether it's being used for gaming or curing cancer, both of them are uptake, regardless of context. The important point is you're not looking at it in isolation and then you look at impact afterwards. But I think we're really struggling because we're not able to track, are these things actually being used? And then we can worry about the secondary, what they're used for, what the benefits are, once we have a really solid position of, are they being used? And I just think it's that clarity and focus that's important for us.
I just want to add that I agree to that. Since to me personally, as something relatively new to this, uptake would be more about the usage and how many people are using it, or what I measure that. If it's being used for games, is it helpful still? Maybe there's maybe something good's happening, or that might be, I would think, a different group evaluating like what is the purpose of the digital research infrastructure, what is it helping? But that would still be high uptake, even if I do think that there is some level of like uptake being positive, but not necessarily, that it has to be any one particular type of benefit.
Thanks. I think probably where my thinking came from was because in the beginning, before we focused on uptake, we were talking about how do you capture impact. And of course, that comes way, way, way down the line. So you have a lot of things that you need to capture first. But I think I at least still have this impact in my head, which is where the whole thing about having great uptake can be a great thing, but isn't necessarily the be all and end all. I think that's where that came from.
So Sverker Holmgren, Chalmers University of Technology. I wrote this perhaps more controversial view. And I think it really depends on why do you want to measure uptake. So if you just want to measure that to present some nice numbers, maybe just the usage is fine. But if you're going to use this material to actually support your research infrastructure, to make sure that it stays alive, meaning you need money, then those providing the money probably wants to see the impact also. So it's one way of actually dealing with that, which is used in many sort of regular research infrastructures, is user fees. And that's not much liked by the digital research infrastructures, but maybe one has to think in that way.
Yes, I can't see the Zoom anymore. So any comments from the online participants? Was that a no?
Yes, I have a comment on the last statement. I think that thinking about user fees as a way to measure the impact is an issue in the open science world. So as far as possible, avoiding user fees is an aim. In my own experience is when we suppressed the user fees very long ago in my own data center, we had the usage which exploded because people at last were able to use the infrastructure they needed.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess sort of a summary would be that so for uptake itself, usage numbers and some of the other measures here, growing user community, etc. So the numbers are probably, well, certainly a good measure. But if we want to think about longer term, why do we want to know the uptake? What are we using that information for? If we want to advocate, if we want to show return on investment, etc., then we have to broaden it beyond what we call uptake, I guess.
I
No?
think that there is the qualitative uptake, if I can say something again. The qualitative uptake can be measured, for instance, it's qualitative, but you get an idea of it by the recognition. I think it was cited before, by the funders, by the community, by the national authorities. It depends a lot on on the type and of the DRA, but you have the recognition by the relevant stakeholders is part of the uptake also, to measure the uptake.
Francois, I think that can be very powerful. If we're using persistent identifiers and we're able to see here is a user, here are their publications, we can move on to the research activity ID and join all the dots to look at that pathway to impact. It is important, but at the moment we're in a position where we are seeking to run national research infrastructures that are beyond what a single institution or a small group of institutions should run. So actually coming back and looking at the number of researchers using a facility is going to be really important for us.
All right. If there are no more comments, can we go to the next slide, please? Actually, oh, there's more. Wow. Okay. Yep. So discipline uptake as well, yeah, where the infrastructure is to go to option for all research in a specific area. That makes sense. So basically coverage or critical mass. Okay. Can we go to the next one? Okay, and as Francoise mentioned, the categories of digital research infrastructure would be relevant when we're looking at uptake. So what would be your suggestions? What should we see? What could be categories of digital research infrastructure? Okay, yes, we will have a look at the GORG model, definitely. Okay, national digital research infrastructure as opposed to local or smaller scale, I guess. Planning tools, yeah. Yeah.
Is the commercial DRI in focus? Oh, it's already there.
Someone just, as you spoke, someone popped up with public and private DRI. Yeah, I agree with the GORG comment. That's great. Yes, we will look at that. So institutional, so with different levels, national, institutional, local. Yeah, repositories, discovery services. Can you scroll down? Yeah, that's good. PIDs, yep. Publication tools. Resource registries. Yep. So there's different dimensions there. One is more about the size or the coverage, if you like, about the type as in what they actually do. And there was another one, which I've lost now. Yep, electronic lab notebooks. But yep, sorry.
Hey, so CJ again, and I was about to say that same thing around like different dimensions of what do you mean by categories, and I'm trying to add a comment, but it's taking a million years to load into the Menti, so it'll get there eventually. But a note to say that some of these things are the types of services that DRI would offer, in which case There's a very extensive and granular list in the GORC model for services and tools. ICT infrastructure might be another consideration. That's also in the GORC model. But then there's also the idea of who's hosting the DRI. So then you can get into, is it an academic institution? Is it as like a nonpartisan federal body? And then you can also get into the dimensions in which the DRI organization exists. So what's its reach? What's its service level? What's its maturity? And that last one is the very first output of the new GORC working group. So some of the things I think we can definitely work together on in addition to like what's already existing in the model.
Thanks. We did not mean to poach any work from the GORC group, but no, that's actually really, I mean, that's great that there seemed to be a lot of overlap in what you're tackling. So yeah, we should definitely work together. Okay, yeah, open versus closed, paid versus free. So I guess the message there is it's not a flat list. It has to have multiple dimensions, and that's, I think, fine.
So Sverker from Chalmers again. So I think, yeah, we are running something, what we call a digital research infrastructure since 5 years. And it covers a lot of the things that are here on the screen. And basically it is also following this GORC model, even though it was not there when we started. But I think a main thing is, what is a digital research infrastructure? Well, what should it support? The researchers that it should support should be asked, what do they need? And that is the digital research infrastructure.
Okay. Any other comments or additions?
I am not sure if I partly agree with Sverker. I think that in some cases it's a top-down activity to set up a digital research infrastructure. If you set up a network, the networking capacity at the national level, it's something which is top-down. So I agree you need a user committee and to understand the user needs. But in some cases, it's a question of policies, or you can have a national PID policy and so on.
Yeah. Any other comments on that? Sorry. Okay. Can you just see if there's any more on that? That's it. Okay. All right. Next. Sorry. Yep. Okay. All right. Oh no. So, okay, that one probably we'll need to try and explain a bit more. So one of the things we want to do in our group is to develop a survey to ask the different key parties involved in digital research infrastructures questions. And what kinds of questions should we ask? And that's a very, very broad thing. I'm not sure if Menti is going to be able to help us there, but potentially we might do that as an open discussion.
Can you clarify, do you mean questions of, let's say, the organizations implementing a DRI, the person who runs a DRI, or the end users of the DRI?
So the idea was that we wanted to survey all of those, basically. So questions for any of those, well, categories, if you like, or personas, probably a better word. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. User personas. Okay. Yeah, so researchers' needs, we've already heard that. Develop user personas. Who put that in? No? Ah, great. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah.
I think one of the ways that you could frame, sorry, Lee Wilson, Digital Research Alliance of Canada. I think one of the ways that you could frame this survey is, by asking a series of branching questions where you're trying to understand more about the potential users and what their needs are, and use it as an opportunity to get like a baseline for Persona's work that you could then develop out further and refine, maybe with some volunteers who took the survey. So, you know, you could have something at the end of the survey saying, is anyone interested in doing follow-up sessions with the authors?
Thanks, Lee. What else do we have? Yep, for researchers, would you want to use, okay, would you want to use this DRI if not required to? That's a really good one. I like that. Okay, yeah, describe the DRIs. Sorry, is that a comment for us? Describe the DRIs you need in your use cases, or is that a question?
It's a question.
Okay, good.
You have a use case and you ask use case people which DRIs you need. And I was writing and have a comment providing you could provide a list of possible DRA types to let people say whether they need this type of DRA, and with an other possibility and asking them to describe what is not covered.
Okay, yep, thanks, that makes sense. Yep, for implementers, what did this DRI make easier in your work? What did it make harder? I like the fact that it's both ways. What prevents uptake or is a blocker? What could make this DRI better for you? Okay. So that also seems to be targeted more to users of the DRI. Any question? Yep, provide a list of possible DRIs useful in the use case with others and asking what the others are. Yeah. So do you have any suggestions for questions we could ask the providers or the organizations that invest in DRIs, or the representatives of organizations that invest in DRIs? Yep. Can you just scroll a bit? Yep, thanks. Okay, so what would indicate return on investment to you? Yeah, that's another question. Yeah, but I like that one too as well, though. So yes. Oh, how long are you funded for comes twice? Okay. Yep. What was the reaction from groups that implemented the DRI? Okay. So that's actually really helpful, because these questions sort of think from different angles, and that is really useful, because I think for us, we could come up with a catalog, but it'll be informed by our thinking and possibly too narrow. So yes. What? Okay. Any other elaborations or comments? How do you interact with your users and your funders? How much support did you need to provide to each institution that adopt? Oh, that's a good one. And in a way, for those that adopt the DRI, the question is, how much effort did it take you, and was it worth it in a way? Yeah, sustainability. How will you work with the community in the future, particularly if you're a startup? Yeah. Yeah, sustainability is, I guess, a big question around DRIs very often. Liv, you're looking at me. Do you want to say anything? Okay. Okay. Any other comments or suggestions? Oh, how likely are you to recommend this tool to a friend or colleague? That sounds like one of the survey questions we always get when we do something. But yeah, that is a very good point. So how well did it work for you, and how well do you think it would work for others in your, like in a similar situation? That's a really good one. All right. Any more, or are we? Yeah.
I can give one more comment. We have actually tried to do this, and maybe I can mention some of the issues that we saw. It's not at all rocket science, so it's pretty obvious in a sense. But first of all, we found it important that we actually ask different groups to really identify different groups. And then when we got the responses, we realized that the responses come from different perspectives, naturally. So a researcher thinks about his or her own research. A provider thinks about the development of that research infrastructure or those services. And a policymaker or university management or whatever think about how can I use this for my policies. And that it might be important to really, we recognized or realized that it is important to sort of recognize these different perspectives.
So I guess that's where the personas also come in, so that we actually have clear categories of people or roles, if you like, in the environment. What have you achieved as a result of the use of the GRI? That goes again a little bit. That's I think again moving beyond uptake, which is not a bad thing. But yeah, that's a useful question. Barriers, we've had that. How much support have you provided? Do you have to provide to your users? So that again goes a little bit into how much support did you need to provide to each institution and then to the users. So again, is it worth doing for the provider? Is there any more? That's it? Okay. No, I meant is there any more? We need to scroll. Okay, good. All right. So thank you everyone for participating in the Menti and coming up with some great stuff. And we'll definitely be in touch about Gork.
Yep. And I've just got one little point to make, or maybe not a point, a request. If you'd like to join our interest group, that would be great. If you can show me that you've joined today, I'll give you a Tim Tam. And if you want to become a co-chair, we're looking for co-chairs. So you might get to. Thanks very much for coming along today.